From courtside of the virtual hardwood, it's the NLSC Podcast, a weekly show for basketball gamers and hardcore hoopheads. This is episode 576. I am Andrew on our forum, Andrew NLSC on X and Blue Sky. I'm joined as always by my co-host Derek, DP3 in the forum, and DP3G and DP384 on X. Derek, we're still making decisions to start our seasons in NBA Live 09 and or NBA 2K9, as we discussed last week, but we have some other things on our minds this week, so please, tip us off.
Yeah, for today's show, our main topic is what basketball video games that did not have a NBA or NCAA license are our favorites. We will share ours, but I also posed this question to the community and we received around a dozen responses, so I'm excited to get to those. Next week, we will cover what non-basketball video games we are currently playing and what keeps us hooked on them. We also received many community responses related to this topic. So, Andrew, let's start with basketball video games that did not carry an NBA or NCAA license. Obviously, one of the draws here is the fantasy aspect, right?
Definitely.
Basically creating our own alternate reality with these teams and players. It's also a proving grounds for video game legends that don't exist anywhere else but in that video game, etc. So it kind of limits our selection, right? Because even games like, for example, NCAA basketball for Super NES, it's loaded with fake players. There's no real players in that game, right? But they did have the NCAA license, so you can't count it, right? They have the teams. I used Georgetown in that game. My brother used BC. My other brother used Baylor. So, you can't include that in these selections. So basically, these would be games that didn't carry either of those licenses. So what was the first game that came to mind for you?
Well, funnily enough, it is the PAL spin-off, the PAL port, the PAL version of the NCAA basketball game that you mentioned, World League Basketball. That's the version we got in Australia and other PAL regions, United Kingdom, Europe, etc. Because, as you know, and as many of our listeners probably know as well, because of who owns the international distribution rights for games based on the NCAA license, they weren't able to release college basketball games outside of North America, so they reskinned it to be a fictional global basketball league, replaced all the schools in the game with fictional teams from around the world. Funnily enough, North Carolina actually became Chicago in that game, the Chicago Breeze. That's also what I call my ultimate team and my team in NBA Live and NBA 2K. I call them the Breeze after playing with the Breeze in World League Basketball. And to your point, it was so fun to play with this fictional scenario. All the players are completely fake. They're the same players, I believe the same names from NCAA basketball, maybe moved around a little bit. From memory, they've taken a lot of the names from the developers of the game. Those are little Easter eggs that you can find. But I remember playing with the Chicago Breeze, playing through an entire season, playing through the playoffs, winning the World Championship. Clayton, the point guard, my man, to your point, a virtual hardwood legend. And it was so much fun to play this fictional scenario. And I didn't know at the time about NCAA basketball. It wasn't released here, obviously. Didn't know all the ins and outs of licensing, being 12 when I got that game, so I wasn't aware of all the backstory of it. Then later learned about Super Dunk Shot, which of course is the Japanese version, the Super Famicom version of that same game. They took out the NCAA as they needed to, replaced them with bootleg NBA teams. We've talked about Super Dunk Shot before, the Chicago Bulls with Michael Jordan. Well, actually, there's no Michael in his name, but we know who it's supposed to be. We know who all the players are supposed to be, the funny team names, the replacement team names, the Boston Celeries, the Los Angeles Lasers, all that stuff. I would have loved to have played that game growing up. I've since added it to my collection with the universal adapter. I'm able to play that on my PAL Super Nintendo, the Famicom cartridge. So just an awesome idea when you don't have the NCAA license or the NBA license to make either a fictional World Basketball League or a bootleg NBA game. Probably wouldn't happen today. Only in the 90s, only in the relative infancy of video games and basketball video games in particular. So that's the first one that comes to mind for me because that was such a fun game. As you know, the mechanics, being able to choose the dunk you want to go up with, the rotating camera, the 3D arena, as it was at the time, the follow cam, very advanced for a 1992 game. Yeah, that is a all-time favorite for me.
The gameplay is solid, right? I mean, you have to be cautious about where you pass. I actually think that in those games, it's very unique the pass mechanics, because it will show green for a good pass, like an icon over the head to your receiver, and then if it's a risky pass, it's yellow, and then if it's red, it's like you don't want to make that pass.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's the only game where I've seen those type of passing mechanics, and I actually think it works pretty well. But you need to use strategy to win. In those games, you need to use your best players, right? You need to look at their 3-point ratings and their player profile screens in order to, be using the best players out there to shoot the ball with. So I think that game is incredibly strong from a gameplay perspective. So I know there were 3 different versions of the game, but they brought the gameplay into all 3 of them. And that means all 3 of them are going to be strong on-court performers, right? You talked about towing the line. So my choice and my favorite, I got to go with Double Dribble. And it's because of what it meant for basketball gaming on home consoles, and how it's the first game that I can remember that towed the line as it relates to what you can get away with without a license. Meaning the developers tried hard to bring NBA 80s greatness to the virtual hardwood without saying, hey, we have the Celtics in the game. The front cover athlete is a random dude trying to dunk it, but he is white with dirty blonde hair and is wearing Celtics green. Above his head is another random dude going into a drive. And guess what, Andrew? He is black, looks like a guard, and he is wearing Lakers gold. You get into the game, and you have a hot team at the time as a selection, Chicago. Double Dribble was released in 1987. Jordan was the talk of the league. The developers knew they had to get a Chicago team in there, right? So people could pretend they were using Michael Jordan in that Chicago red out on the virtual hardwood. For the start screen, you can see 2 white silhouettes of players dribbling, a slightly more athletic motion than the real NBA logo showing a silhouette of Jerry West, and the colors on the title screen are half blue and half red, just like the real NBA logo. Then you try to get into the game and they show fans flooding into the stadium. The national anthem is being played. You have mascots dancing at halftime and the cheerleaders at half court. They did whatever they possibly could to bring NBA action to the virtual hardwood without having an NBA license. Like, all of what I just said was completely intentional, and it worked. The game was incredibly popular, and people pretended they were using Jordan and Bird out there and Magic and whatnot. And we were doing that in our house when we were playing the game. And I do think that game can also get incredibly competitive from a gameplay standpoint because of the steal mechanics, where to get a steal you just have to run through the opposing player and hit the steal button, and it can cause for some crazy action, as far as trying to stop people to get to their favorite spots at the 3-point line and all of that stuff. You really do need to use strategy to win in that game. So for me, because of the lore, because of it being the first console basketball video game to really toe that line, and because it's a strong on-court performer, I got to go with Double Dribble.
No, and I've seen other people mention Double Dribble, rightfully so, like the granddaddy or one of the granddaddies of modern basketball gaming, obviously. And the imagination was such a key component, even in the mid to late 90s, the games that we really grew up with, Derek, that were more advanced, there was still that element of imagination. You've talked about writing articles, and I did the same thing, and keeping stats, and writing these stories and imagining plot lines as you play through the season. That imagination was so special. But you go back to the even earlier days of gaming, and imagination was key. It was absolutely vital with the primitive graphics. But as you said, the lack of licensing as well. But by dancing that line, by getting as close as possible, by having those elements that were reminiscent, but legally distinct, presumably, more so than Super Dunk Shot anyway, you could really invite that imagination. And that was a really cool part of gaming. Like, I'm glad that we have all the legends these days and all the content that we do, and the games have gotten as deep as they have and as detailed as they have, but there is definitely a charm to that imagination.
Oh, absolutely. I do want to point out that my favorite basketball game of all time that had fake names but did carry a license is NCAA basketball, because for the Super NES, because I can still remember my entire Georgetown team. I can still remember the video game legends. in that game. For Georgetown, I had Stevens and Larson and Naylor and Cox, and I had Tapp off the bench, who always helped me. He was a big guy and whatnot. Larson, I believe, was a 37% shooter in his player profile, so I could hit some threes with him. You don't want to play Boston College in that game because they have Hinsey, and he's a center, but he's shown as a 50% three-point shooter in the game. He can pull up near half court and whatnot. Like, I remember taking those fake players onto the virtual hardwood and just loving using them and creating memories around them and creating these scenarios around them and whatnot. And my brothers and I just had an absolute blast with that game. If they were real players or if they just had numbers assigned, the lore to that game wouldn't be the same. So, NCAA basketball would probably be my favorite licensed game with fake players. What about you?
I mean, I suppose apart from World League Basketball, there hasn't really been many that I've played like that. Not being able to grow up with the college basketball games, they've retroactively become favorites. I really enjoy NCAA Basketball 09 because of the classic teams and being able to replace the names. NCAA Basketball 10, also very strong, obviously, so similar to NBA Live 10 on the court. But in that same vein, it's not the best game on the virtual hardwood, but Michael Jordan in Flight. And it is licensed in so much as it has Michael Jordan, but he is the only real player in the game, kind of like Barkley, Shut Up and Jam, kind of like David Robinson's Supreme Court, that he is the only real player in a fictional 3-on-3 league, and all fictional players, teammates, and opponents that randomly get put on different teams. You can actually mod that for PC. You can actually open up the data file and change the names. To a certain extent, there's very limited modding. Mentioned that in a recent Friday 5 actually. But it is a PC-only release featuring Michael Jordan, which made it kind of a rarity in the 90s, and it has that instant replay mode. You can actually save instant replays and edit them and change the angles. Gameplay is okay, it's pretty limited, but you got a few fancy dunks. When you make a great play, that full-motion video of MJ pops up doing the fist pump. When you mess up, the other full-motion video pops up with MJ shaking his head in disappointment. Very much a gimmick, but that's kind of how it was with PC gaming in the early 90s. Still pretty well done. It's no Jordan versus Bird, it's no Lakers versus Celtics or NBA Live or anything like that, but I quite like Michael Jordan in Flight. And yes, a lot of that does come down to the fact that I am such a Michael Jordan fan, and it's kind of a novelty, but it's okay, it's solid.
Similar concept also to Slam and Jam 96, where Magic and Kareem are the only real players.
Indeed.
In that game. However, they also tried to toe the line a little bit because I believe on their team in that game there is a dude with goggles like James Worthy.
Yep.
And you can throw it down quite a bit with him. Not that big of a fan of that game. You and I did play it, and the action was out of this world crazy. It's one of the games that you can't play for more than 10 or 15 minutes without just getting completely bored, right? And we've talked about games like that in the past. And if you try to play like a full regulation game on Slam and Jam 96, you are going to be miserable.
Yeah.
Because the action doesn't support that.
It's like In the Zone. Like, In the Zone is much better, don't get me wrong, much like Run and Gun, Konami's arcade version, of course. And I know a couple of people mentioned that, rightfully so. It's kind of in that same vein, that sim arcade hybrid, but not quite as good. And even NBA In the Zone, while I do like those games better, you have to really play them on 3 to 5 minute quarters, really. A full-length game is just a bit too much. So it's the same with Slam and Jam, but even more so because it's not quite as strong as Konami's games.
You know what really bugs me about NBA Give and Go? It's the camera view. And just to let everybody know, NBA Give and Go came to consoles, it came to Super NES, and it is basically very similar to Run and Gun, just with the NBA license. I believe Run and Gun in the arcades was released in like 1993, and then NBA Give and Go came shortly after. From memory, I don't believe I've ever played Run and Gun, but I have played NBA Give and Go. I had it when I was younger. I play it on the emulator, etc. So when you have the ball in NBA Give and Go, and let's say you're on the left side of the floor, you can't see the right side of the floor because of that camera view. It's so zoomed in. It's from behind. You don't know if your player is open on the opposite side of the floor. You don't know if somebody's posting up on the opposite block. You just can't see the other side of the floor. So when I play that game, I feel like I'm playing on only one side of the court. the majority of the time. And I don't know if our listeners have played those games and they feel that same frustration, but it's the biggest weakness in the game. It's unfortunate that there weren't other camera options, because not being able to see one half of the court eliminates some strategy, right? That you could possibly use, like real basketball strategy, and swinging it to the opposite side of the court, all of that. So that would be my biggest gripe. Otherwise, I love the shooting animations, the dunking animations. It can be fun to play defense, etc. But I don't know if you've kind of had that same frustration with that game.
Oh yeah, the zoomed in angle in that game and the clones like Slam and Jam, it's definitely to the game's detriment. And it doesn't help with co-op play, because we often found ourselves, both of us, off the screen and trying to find out where we were. And yes, you've got the classic off-screen arrows that kind of show you, but not really. It doesn't really help. You are out of position, out of bounds even. And that is a problem with Konami's games as well. I never played Run and Gun in the arcades either, but I did see it once. I did see it on a big screen as well, so it looked pretty cool, and I really should have given it a go. I think we were leaving, and I didn't have an opportunity to play, but I did see it set up and see the demo running, and they also had, I believe, or maybe it was the sequel, also had like the full halftime show or a recap show that was showing top highlights. Again, very advanced for that time. So, very cool ideas, but yeah, something as elementary as the view of the gameplay, the camera angle, is vital. And you're right, they got it wrong.
An honorable mention here, too, for games that didn't have any license. Double Dribble Playoff Edition. Now, I know you and I connected on this. You weren't a fan of it. I do think that the gameplay is really rough in that one. Even just something as simple as the shooting motions look absolutely terrible and feel terrible in that game. But we actually spent a lot of time on that game on the Sega Genesis growing up. And again, it's that alternate reality. P. Pavich on Chicago he looked like Jordan, right? He was the best player on the team. They towed that line. He was, black and bald, and he was athletic, and he was easily your go-to guy on the Bulls. Their power forward, I want to say his name was Bolf, B-O-L-F. He had goggles like Horace Grant, right? Yeah. They knew what they were doing.
Absolutely.
With that. And they also had fun with the names, and we've talked about that before. Like you said, they put like developers in there. But I'm pretty sure like J. Page and F. Zappa are in there for like Led Zeppelin, right? And I want to say there was like G. Washington or something like that. Like they tried to have fun with the names as well. You can see some musical artists in there. You can see movie star names in there, etc. So they tried to have a little bit of fun with it. But we still, we created a lot of video game legends with that game as well. And they did the same thing as the original, Double Dribble and whatnot, where obviously they couldn't use regular NBA team names, but they had the real team name cities in there and stuff. So, not a strong performer on the court like the original Double Dribble, but still some fond memories of that game.
Oh, it's definitely interesting. I mean, it wasn't my favorite. I think it is rougher than the original Double Dribble, obviously, but it was ambitious. They were trying something there. I will also mention, once again, alluded to it before, Jordan versus Bird. The amount of detail they put into that. You read through the manual, and you can see just how much they were trying to capture both players realistically, as much as they could with the technology of the time. And you look at the dunks, you look at the shooting form for even the PC version. I know you mostly played the NES version. In some ways, that is certainly a superior version, graphically, if nothing else. But either way, just great detail in those games. There is actually another World League Basketball for PC. I need to really spend time with it. I did pick it up on eBay a while back. Haven't really played it as much, but I want to see what it's like. It's from Mindscape, and it's for PC. So that's interesting that there is two games called World League Basketball. It's not the one that I played growing up, but I will cover that for Way Back Wednesday at some point. Got to give a shout out to Slam City with Scottie Pippen. Obviously, that's not, I didn't play it growing up. I know you did. Very interesting game, FMV game. They were getting popularity in the mid-90s, of course going back to the 80s with Dragon's Lair, of course, but interesting approach to a basketball video game. And these are the games we grew up with. But look, I'm just going to say Basketball Classics from Nemo Gamo. That is a new modern favorite in that retro style.
Right. And we talked about that game with them on the show. And I think that they did a really good job, emulating the 8-bit era of basketball video games, but adding also some modern mechanics that, people would like, adding, a shot meter and, the ability to run plays, something you can't do in double dribble. And they also, we've talked about it before as far as the art and all of that stuff. They also, tried to make it appeal to those who love the NBA, right? Towing that line a little bit. And you kind of have to, right? If you want a bigger audience for your game. And the other point is that these developers, more than likely, Andrew, just like Josh and Dave, what got them into basketball? The NBA, right? They were big Utah Jazz fans and whatnot, and probably are still Utah Jazz fans today. But one of their draws to wanting to make a basketball video game was their love for the NBA. Indeed. So of course that's going to be something that in some way, shape, or form, without a license, they're going to want to implement into their game. I also want to point out that I was watching some footage of Run and Gun, and one thing that I'll say is where it has advantages over NBA Give and Go is the graphics are smoother, the animations are smoother, and the gameplay looks more fun. Like, it looks faster and whatnot. So I'm not sure why they tone that down for consoles. Obviously, arcades can have, some more enhanced graphics back then than what could be achieved on consoles. But as far as the pace and smoothness and whatnot, would have kind of liked to see that in NBA Give and Go.
Definitely. And speaking of basketball classics and indie games and unlicensed games, it was thrown out there on our Facebook page because I've shared some NBA Live 95 footage there, and somebody said, I'd love to see a game like this today with modern rosters or fictional rosters, just have that isometric camera angle and that old school gameplay, but with modern rosters, for example, or rosters that we could edit and make and add real players too, like basketball classics, like we can with that, similar to the NCAA games, of course. And we could do a whole show about this, and maybe we'll circle back to it, but I would love to see that. Basketball classics is that 8-bit era, that's fantastic, but I would love to see an indie game tackle that 16-bit style, bring back that isometric camera angle, and give us that game, and give us some modding capabilities and in-game editing capabilities, and be able to simulate that era of basketball.
I would play it. I would buy it day one, honestly.
Yeah.
And it would be cool if it had, editing capabilities and roster editing and whatnot that, Basketball Classics added to their game. And that would be a hit, I think, with a lot of people. I also need to bring up, before we get to the community responses to this topic, Street Hoops, Andrew, right? They didn't have real players in that game. You and I connected on Street Hoops for PS2, and how much fun did we have? I uploaded that gameplay to the NLSC YouTube, and just the variety of animations, the smoothness of them, the sweet looking jump shot animations, how fun it is to play defense, almost as fun as to play offense, which is, the mark of a really good basketball video game. The moves you could pull off, like your favorite street players of the time or of the past and whatnot. So I thought Street Hoops, having no license, not having real N1 players, all of that stuff, not having real street ball legends, I think that's a really strong on-court performer, and I think it should be in this conversation.
Oh yeah, and it's also that weird example where the N1 license is kind of there because you can unlock some of the mixtapes and the brand is in the game, but like you say, none of the actual mixtape tour players, so they're all fictional players, so it definitely counts from that perspective, and it's solid. It does have some clunky moments, and N1 Street Ball, the follow-up, it's not an official sequel as such, it's kind of the spiritual successor. It's not really a series, but it's basically the follow-up. Might as well call it a sequel. N1 Street Ball is the superior game on the court. It does have the real players. It adds a bit more content. The modes in Street Hoops, as I mentioned in my Way Back Wednesday retrospective, kind of weird, kind of shallow, kind of strange how they handle some of the unlockables, but at the same time interesting, and it does have kind of a cult following. You see people mention it from time to time as this overlooked gem, and those are strong words. I don't know whether I'd use the word gem, but it's certainly very solid. It's a lot of fun. I'd never say no to throwing it on and having another co-op session and playing it solo as well. And to that point, proof that you can make a solid game without real players. Although, as we've said before, the draw is always in having that license, either the NBA or NCAA, and especially the NBA, having real players. But no, there is a niche interest and a way to make an exciting, fun basketball game with no license.
And One Street Ball took it to a whole new level. And just the atmosphere in that game, it's so easy to get immersed in it. And, you have the, courtside hype man going like, oh, baby, and all of that stuff. And it's like, this is what I saw on TV, right? This is the And One mixtape tour right here. This is getting me hyped up. The atmosphere, I think the gameplay, they added so many great mechanics, bounce alley-oops off the backboard. There's the stuff that we were able to pull off in that game using some of the, greatest And One players of all time. Just, it's awesome. And that gameplay is also up on the NLSC YouTube. And I actually really want to connect with you on that game again and sometime soon, because I think it creates great highlights for the NLSC top 10 plays of the week. And I just think that the action is super fun. Even playing defense, like we said, mark of a great game, right? You have the professor out there and you're trying to pull off moves. And if you're not doing it right and you're playing against another human, he's going to snatch that ball from you and head the other way. If you go up for a weak dunk, or you go up for a dunk in traffic and maybe it's Escalade that's in front of you, he is going to knock you out of the air. He is going to swat that shot. He might catch it with two hands and then you're headed the other way. And, we've been playing NBA Street Volume 2 a lot lately. We started the quest of beating all the NBA teams and unlocking all the content in that game. We're playing the PS2 version. Right now we're using the Houston Rockets. I'm on Francis, he's on Yao, and we usually put either James Posey or Eddie Griffin out there to help us out. But playing defense in NBA Street Volume 2 is just so damn fun, right? And the mechanics make so much sense. So I think of And One Street Ball in a similar way to that. Again, mark of a great game, fun to play basketball on both ends.
And let's not forget that your question did say NBA or NCAA licensing. So And One was not technically included in your question. So it is certainly a licensed game that is not an NBA licensed game or an NCAA licensed game. So I think we can count it in that regard.
Well, if you want to go down that road, you can bring up games too, like Tiny Toons Acme All-Stars, right?
Yeah.
There's a basketball component to that game, which I think is incredibly strong. Looney Tunes basketball. I do think that the Tiny Toons Acme All-Stars basketball portion, they have basketball and soccer in there, I believe. But that is a hidden gem. That is an underrated gem because it wasn't marketed as a basketball video game. It's just Tiny Toons Acme All-Stars. But the gameplay is so good, right? The special abilities of the players, Montana Max jumping in his car and running people over and then shooting the basketball from his car, all of that stuff. The game is actually a very strong on-court performer in a similar way to Looney Tunes basketball. So for those who have not played Tiny Toons Acme All-Stars for Sega Genesis, try to get your hands on that if you like that sort of style of game, kind of some goofy, wacky fun, because we spent countless hours on that game playing head to head and whatnot growing up, and it was really fun.
And the other thing, of course, that being a licensed game, and licensed games, we talk about NBA licensed games, and there have been some pretty shoddy ones of those, even from major studios. NBA Live 7 obligatory reference here, but a lot of the time back in the 90s, you'd have these licensed games based on a TV show, based on a movie, and they'd be pretty ordinary and poorly designed, and they're just basically being sold on the strength of their brand, whatever popular franchise they were based on. So the fact that they actually went all out and made a mechanically good basketball game and sports game when they could have just sold it on the Looney Tunes name, that's admirable, that's commendable.
Exactly, because we've seen attempts in the past where it was just basically just trying to bank on the license, right? Where it was basically, making gameplay mechanics and options and whatnot just at a super minimum. And sometimes those games were successful from a sales perspective just for the fact that, somebody loved that cartoon, right? Somebody loved that show, etc. So it's nice to see that those two games got the love that they deserved. I think that the Space Jam game for PlayStation 1, they were basically mostly banking on just the love for that movie, right?
Yeah.
Because the game is so shallow, from a depth
okay.
perspective. There's
Right.
in the gameplay, exactly. It's so basic. The gameplay is incredibly basic. Your options are limited. Graphics are cool, right? Because they're banking on that. They're banking on, people saying, ooh, look, it looks like the Monstars. But really, when it comes down to it, the gameplay is very, very basic, and there's basically no depth in that game.
Well, that's the thing, is like, how can you really make a full basketball game based on Space Jam? You've got those mini games in between to pad it out. Once you've played it once, once you've won the game, there's only one basketball game played, one proper competitive game played in Space Jam, apart from the NBA games where the players are getting their talent stolen, I suppose. But you can either play as the Toon Squad and win and have the happy ending of the movie, or you can play as the Monstars and get the bad ending, I suppose. So not a lot of replay value to that. It definitely is sold on, this is Michael Jordan, the one game at the time that had Michael Jordan, funnily enough, and Looney Tunes, of course, based on a successful and popular movie, not always well reviewed, but as I said in a previous show, actually one of my favourites. No apologies for that. It's sold on a very shallow premise, and it is a shallow game. Solid, but very basic and shallow. Before we go on, a reminder that the NLSC podcast comes out every week on the NLSC, NBA-live.com, as well as our YouTube channel. We're also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other podcast apps. If you're listening on any of those apps, we'd greatly appreciate a review. To keep up with the show and everything we're doing with basketball gaming in general, connect with us on social media. On Twitter and Facebook, we are the NLSC. We also have an Instagram, NLSC Basketball, and on YouTube, we're youtube.com/NBA Live Series Center. Once again, visit us at NBA-live.com, where in addition to the podcast, you'll also find all of our original content, as well as our forum and modding community.
So, Andrew, let's get to the community responses to this question. Once again, the question was, what basketball video game that did not have an official NBA or NCAA license is your favorite of all time? So, first response was Marcus Matthews at GoTechAlum_IE92. He states Run and Gun in the arcades. And yeah, we discussed this a little bit earlier. That game appears to have come out in 1993, and I was just watching gameplay footage of it, and it looks incredibly fun. The smooth graphics, the sweet-looking jump shots, the high-flying dunks, the pace of the action. I could see myself, if we had one in an arcade around here as a kid, feeding that machine constantly with quarters in order to get some action in on that game. So I see why Run and Gun is so popular here.
Oh yeah, like I said, I saw it in an arcade once and regret not playing it in the arcade because it had a big screen, looked really cool, going up, seeing the backboard shatter randomly, and then of course get fixed during the game. Not a problem, that's not what the game is about. We don't want the actual game delays here, and watching the backboard just sag as players hung on the rim looks really cool. And shout out to Marcus, a developer on the original NBA 2K games.
Yeah, and that's super exciting stuff. It also states that he worked on the NFL 2K games. And honestly, I was just playing the original NFL 2K recently, and I shared a highlight of me throwing it to Randy Moss for a touchdown. And I shared that on the Discord. And man, that game still holds up, Andrew. The original NFL 2K is so good from a graphics and gameplay perspective, and the mechanics are so solid, and I love the presentation. 2K was on the rise from the get-go, right? Like they were so strong with the original NBA 2K and NFL 2K.
Competition, it's important, it's vital.
Tecmo Bowl GGL at Tecmo Bowl GGL states, double dribble, and it's not even close. And that was my choice, Andrew, for all the reasons that I mentioned. Neon and Butch Gaming, so at Stildo33, states Ultimate Basketball was also really good on the original Nintendo. That was one of my favorites all time. And Ultimate Basketball came out in 1990 on the NES. And my memories of that game were the cutscenes. It was the ones where you take a three and it cuts to a close-up with better graphics of the player shooting the three and whatnot, or going up for a block, etc. And I think that a lot of games were doing that at the time in order to add a different dimension to games that were a little bit more primitive in order to, spice up the action and whatnot. And I think that it worked well in that game, having those cut scenes, the mini games, all of that stuff. And if you actually take a look, it almost looks like Basketball Classics, the gentleman at Namo Gamo, that they took inspiration from that, right? Like the double dribble cut scene on the dunks, the cut scenes on Ultimate Basketball, and in like games like Tecmo Super NBA Basketball, which they said they weren't a huge fan of, but I'm sure that they liked parts of it. But yeah, I think that game is strong, and I have played it, and it does have its moments.
So Ultimate Basketball and All Pro Basketball, from the same developers, I believe, released a couple of years apart for the NES. I didn't get them in Australia. They're another North American exclusive, so I didn't play them until many years later through emulation. And I wasn't as impressed. I think it's the camera cut at half court kind of throws me off. Again, I'm playing it without nostalgia. And you know me, Derek, when I do go back and play these games, I do try to put myself in the mindset of what was it like at the time. You've got to take into account the technology of the time and the design principles of the time. And maybe I just need to play them a little bit more. But the cutscenes, like Double Dribble, they are very cool. And of course, that was a way around not having all of those animations at the rim that we'd have in later games. And of course, that also reminds me of Hoops for NES. Kind of an underrated game. It is tough. It is kind of clunky. We try to play co-op. We need to give it another shot. I think once we master some of the passing mechanics and being able to avoid the cheap steals, we can actually dominate in that game, Derek. But there is fun to be had with that game. There's actually endings you can get for the characters. You can actually finish the campaign and see the endings for all the characters. I do love that. There's still imagination there. As I said in my retrospective, the characters, they're stock characters. It's a kind of cheesy story for all of them and cheesy endings, but at the same time, that's part of the charm. I just love the colors of that game, the vibe, the atmosphere. Reminds me of playing outside on a Saturday afternoon, but playing video games on a Saturday afternoon, and then going outside and playing on a Saturday afternoon. Just that sunny vibe, that sunny atmosphere, if you will. Hoops for NES, kind of overlooked.
Yeah, we did have fun connecting on that. I think that the game is incredibly hard against the PC. It's even hard to just make a basic pass to your teammate when you're trying to play like 2-on-2 in that game. We're going to have to try to figure that out in order to have more fun with the game. Lastly, about Ultimate Basketball, before we move to the next response, Andrew, the game had a dunk meter, and I know that you would love that. But when you go out for dunks in that game, there's a meter, and you want to try to get it into the desired space in order to be able to successfully complete that dunk. It also has a cool block mini game where if they're going up for a dunk and you want to try to block it, you can actually block it by, completing the meter properly. So Ultimate Basketball was doing a lot of really cool things at the time, and I see why Stildo would love it.
Oh, yeah. And I think you're right. I think Josh and Dave actually did take some inspiration from that, because you look at their dunk and block minigames in Basketball Classics. Yeah, quite reminiscent.
Ryan Cammons at Low Poly states, CinemaWare's TV Sports Basketball. And this game came out in 1989, and the various platforms that it was released for was Amiga, TurboGrafx 16, DOS, and Amiga OS. And it states TV Sports Basketball is a 1989 computer basketball game for the home computers. It was developed by CinemaWare and published by Microsoft. And then it states the platforms I just mentioned. It is part of the TV Sports series that included TV Sports Baseball, as well as other games based on hockey and American football. I have never played this game, but looking at the gameplay and the screenshots, the camera view is very similar to NBA Action 95, which you and I connected on and played and uploaded footage of. It's just like this overhead view that only shows from, like each half court that you're actually currently playing on. So it goes through like a transition when you cross half court and whatnot. And the players are about the same size on NBA Action 95 as TV Sports Basketball. I'd love to get my hands on it and give it a try because it does look intriguing. But yeah, never played that one.
I have actually played that one. I own it as part of the CinemaWare collection. Defender of the Crown is in that as well, another childhood favourite from the NES days, and that was released again on Amiga and several platforms. But in any case, yeah, it's okay. From memory, it has the same problem with crossing half court and the way the perspective changes. It can be a little bit confusing at first, but also has roster editing. You can rename the players.
Yeah, and that's highly advanced for that time, for the late 80s, early 90s. MF Don states double dribble. Andrew at Andrew the X says, I honestly keep to licensed games, so might go all the way back to maybe double dribble on NES, but I could be forgetting one. B_rad93 at B_rad93 says, Run and Gun is my favorite, but hard as hell. It was ported to the Super Nintendo as NBA Give and Go 2 years after Run and Gun was released. I've never played that one. From what I've seen, it doesn't run as fast nor look as good as the arcade, but I hear that it's actually a solid port. I played NBA Give and Go quite a bit, and I do think that it's solid. I think that it has enough similarities to what I'm seeing for the gameplay footage for Run and Gun where you would enjoy it. But I can definitely see that it's not as smooth as I stated prior. The animations don't play out as nice. The action is not as fast and whatnot. So yeah, Run and Gun is obviously a popular choice, Andrew. And then the last response that we received on Twitter, Cortez at Hey Yo Court says Run and Gun arcade. So it looks like Run and Gun and Double Dribble are the clear winners here.
Oh yeah, very popular and iconic in the history of basketball gaming. And that was the thing about games back in the 90s, the home ports of arcade games. And I think we got some pretty good home ports of NBA Jam. They are the versions that I grew up playing, actually, Super Nintendo and PC specifically. But again, trying to replicate the arcade on home systems that didn't necessarily have the same power, had to meet different hardware specifications, obviously, or much weaker hardware in the case of the 16-bit consoles. There were some really good arcade ports, but I remember that was always a point in reviews of those home ports, mentioning how true to the arcade version they were.
And I think the thing is like we stated, not only did arcades have more power, but they were also designed for a different need. Right. And he talks about how hard Run and Gun was in the arcades. And that's because they want you to keep feeding quarters.
Of
right.
course.
They want you to lose, and they want you to lose a lot. And they want you to at times even get frustrated because of your losing and being like, no, I can conquer this. I'm better than this. I can beat this. But, bringing a game to consoles, they want it to appeal to everybody, right? And they don't want the player to get frustrated as much. They know that the person's not going to be feeding the console countless quarters and making them more and more money as they own the game or are playing the game and whatnot. Similar vein to Contra, right? So when Contra came to the NES, it was entirely different than the Contra that was at the arcades. You play the arcade version of Contra, and there are way more enemies. It's way more challenging. You're going to be dying constantly, and that's because they want you to keep feeding it quarters. But when you have Contra on the NES, my brother and I beat it in 12 minutes, right, without dying. So, I mean, when you first play it, obviously it can be a little bit more of a challenge, but, there's less bad guys. There's less obstacles. Enemies die easier, all of that stuff. So it's hard to compare Run and Gun and NBA Give and Go in that aspect because they are shooting for a completely different audience when bringing that game to consoles.
Oh, for sure. And as far as technological limitations are concerned, you look at a game like Punch-Out, you can't have the wireframe of the original version, so you have Little Mac. You have the smaller character to be able to fit both characters on the screen and have the gameplay as it was. And then that version becomes iconic because of that approach and the story that they added for that. So they made the most of those technological limitations to create something slightly different, but still special.
So moving over to Discord, we did receive a few responses. Pharmacist12 says freestyle. And we've noticed that there's various versions of that game that show up on Steam. I've seen the gameplay. It doesn't look like it would appeal to me. The players just kind of methodically plod around the court. They're very slow. Doesn't look like there's much speed at all to the game. I believe those games are absolutely flooded with microtransactions as well, because I think the game is free to play. And then pay to win, right? Basically. So it's not a game I would get into, but it does look like it has cool art. Actually, the art looks very similar to Borderlands, right? You've played those games and whatnot. It's very similar. And the game does have some decent animations every now and then, like shooting animations look decent and whatnot. But that's not a game that, I would probably get into, Andrew.
Yeah, same. I've been intrigued by it. I've looked it up a couple of times because people have mentioned it and mentioned enjoying it, but I don't think it's for me.
QB1120 states, I have played quite a few in my lifetime, and the ones that come to mind are Street Hoops, which wasn't that good, but I played quite a bit on PS2, and Looney Tunes B-Ball. I'd say my favorite, because of my love for the Double Dragon series, is Neketsu Street Basket on Famicom. I've never even heard of that one, Andrew, but I'll have to look up gameplay. He states it's got fighting mechanics in it, and just getting possession of the ball can be pretty wild. Sounds a little bit like Arch Rivals. Multiple baskets on each side also make it very interesting. Seems like an NBA Jam style game before NBA Jam existed.
Yeah, and there's obviously room to experiment with virtual basketball. You look at a game like Dunk Lords. That's a very different take on arcade basketball and the sport of basketball in general. So there's been that kind of experimentation with basketball video games. I've always preferred games that stick a bit closer to basketball. NBA Street, NBA Jam is about as far out as I'll go for my favorites, but those other games are definitely intriguing. They're definitely interesting, and I know that they do have a following. But yeah, I haven't heard of that game either, but we'll have to look it up.
All right, this game is insane, Andrew. So I just looked this up, and pretty sure I just saw a pig dunk on a 30-foot hoop. And there's like 3 different hoops on each side of the court, and this action looks absolutely insane. This might actually be something that I would have messed around with when I was younger. Probably not something that I would play today, but this game looks crazy.
Oh, worth a look, yeah.
Careless XCI states, the ones from Idoro, probably International Basketball 2009, if I had to mention one in particular. Andrew, obviously a huge fan of that game. We'll get into that in a second. He continues, since you guys have already talked about it some years ago on the podcast, gameplay, of course, sucks, but they absolutely nailed the look and overall atmosphere of European venues, so much so that I played quite a lot back when it came out. If you pretend it was released 10 years earlier than it actually was, it becomes a decent game.
Yeah.
And yeah, we played it, and it was a miserable experience. However, we did have fun laughing at it. The commentary where he takes like a regular 3-pointer and the commentator goes from outer space. Yeah, that game is not a strong on-court performer.
Now, hang on a moment. That game heightens the parabola of basketball gaming, as we've said before.
What were they thinking with those comments that they don't even make sense?
Well, I'll give them this. Their English is better than my Italian, so, credit to them for trying. But yeah, they certainly got some rough translations for the commentary. Maybe they should have outsourced that, had somebody, a native English speaker, to do the English version of the commentary. Might have worked out a little bit better. But yeah, as he says, the gameplay, if it came out 10 years before, would be kind of impressive, kind of okay, but it's a couple of generations behind for a game that came out in the late 2000s. But yeah, that's the sim version. Incredi Basketball is kind of a more arcade approach. Same teams, but you've got all these crazy power-ups, big hands like foam hands appearing on the player's hands to be able to swat and steal the ball, ice over the rim, that kind of thing. Quite creative. With a better engine, with a better designed game, would actually be pretty good, but entertaining in their own way. I remember I got them on sale for about $5, I think, maybe $5 for the 2 of them, around about that time, late 2000s, early 2010s, off a tip in the forum. So I'm glad I have them, because I don't think they're available anymore, or at least only one of them is, possibly. So yeah, I'm glad I have them in the collection, but yeah, not good. They're a novelty.
After you played it, you probably thought, with this $5, I could have gotten a nice fancy coffee, and I would have enjoyed that a little bit more.
Yeah, but coffee doesn't heighten the parabola for me.
It does for me. If I don't have my morning coffee, my parabola is not heightened.
So moving over to Facebook, Matt says, College Hoops 2K8. Now, of course, that might sound like a bit of a cheat, but you know what, Derek? Technically, there is no NCAA licensing in that game, because EA had the NCAA license. But it's kind of walking the line there. But to that point, the college games were able to succeed without real players.
Yeah, Coach K college basketball. I mean, they did have the real teams, right, and the real logos and whatnot, but they didn't have any of the real player names, and all the players just had numbers and whatnot. And we created video game legends with that game anyway. And created our own alternate reality and whatnot, and that was a blast. So I don't blame anybody for choosing some of the college basketball games as their favorites, because they didn't have the real names of the players, and it is an alternate reality situation.
And to that point, if EA Sports does bring back a college basketball video game, they're not going to have the NCAA license. They didn't for college football. They have split from the NCAA after all of the after the fallout of that lawsuit and whatnot. But they're going to have the schools, obviously, but not the NCAA licensing. So it's going to be the college championship rather than the NCAA title specifically. But yeah, I still think it works. You've still got the schools. Probably going to have real players moving forward. That's going to be interesting. But again, the virtual hardwood legends that you could create with any games that had fictional rosters, and yes, they're a harder sell than NCAA or certainly NBA, but there's a lot of charm to them, and you can see from the responses that we got from the community that we're not alone here, that people did enjoy using their imaginations, playing those games that were pretty close to being licensed, or even if they went in a completely different direction, like World League Basketball, and created this whole fictional global basketball league and these fictional teams from around the world with interesting names. Super Dunk Shot is obviously very much a novelty with being a bootleg NBA game, essentially, but World League Basketball, still a great concept in its own right. Yeah, it's a tough sell, but yeah, I'm all for games with fictional players and teams. So thank you once again to everybody who responded to Derek's prompts. We love hearing from the community, having you involved in our discussion each and every week. And yeah, next week, Derek, we'll get to some games that aren't about basketball.
Yeah, and I want to get into that because one of the questions here is what's the draw, right? What mechanics are drawing you to those games and whatnot, and maybe we can tie that back to mechanics we'd like to see in basketball video games, whether it be mechanics that are more fair, whether it be interesting ideas and designs and whatnot. But yeah, we actually received a lot of responses to that community question. We'll probably have a few more come in before we record the next show. So yeah, that'll be fun to get into.
And I know from personal experience that there are consistent themes with what draws me to certain basketball games, design ideas that also appeal to me in other genres. So yeah, it's going to be a very interesting discussion. With that being said, that has brought us to the end of this week's show. As always, thank you for tuning in, and please join us again next week and every week on the NLSC, nba-live.com, our YouTube channel, or wherever you listen to podcasts. In the meantime, make sure you're following us on social media. That's where you can get in touch with us, and of course, stay up to date with all of our content. So Derek, go ahead and plug the handles.
Hey, you can reach me on X, formerly known as Twitter, at D for3G and at D for384. I'm also on the NLSC, D for3, and on YouTube, D for3.
As for me, I'm Andrew in the forum and Andrew NLSC on X and Blue Sky. The NLSC is on X, Facebook, and Blue Sky at the NLSC. We're also NLSC Basketball on Instagram and Threads. We're on YouTube at NBA Live Series Center. And of course, keep a look to the NLSC itself, nba-live.com, for everything we do for basketball video games. So, thank you once again for tuning in, and until next time, I'm Andrew.
And I'm Derek.
Go get buckets, everyone.